February 9th, 1945. 200 feet below the freezing surface of the North Sea, a British submarine commander stared through his periscope at something no Allied sailor had ever seen before. A German U-boat running submerged, carrying a cargo that could change the outcome of the war. One torpedo, one chance. And if he missed, the secret would disappear into the Atlantic forever. The winter of 1945 was a season of endings. Across Europe, the Third Reich was collapsing under the weight of Allied advances from east and west. Berlin was burning. The Luftwaffe had been swept from the skies, and yet, beneath the gray waters of the Atlantic, Germany's Kriegsmarine was preparing one final desperate gamble, a mission so secret that even decades later, its full purpose would remain shrouded in speculation and classified documents. Her name was U-864, a Type 1 D2 U-boat, one of the largest submarines in the German fleet. She was 287 feet long, displaced over 1,800 tons submerged, and was designed for one purpose: long-range operations far from home waters. Unlike the smaller Type 7 boats that hunted convoys and wolf packs, the IXD-2 was built for endurance. She could travel 16,000 nautical miles without refueling, a range that could take her around the Cape of Good Hope and into the Indian Ocean. But distance alone didn't make U-864 special. What made her unique was her cargo. In December of 1944, U-864 was loaded at the port of Bergen, Norway, under conditions of absolute secrecy. Her holds were packed with advanced technology, jet engine components, technical blueprints, optical equipment for targeting systems, and mercury. 67 tons of liquid mercury sealed in steel flasks. Mercury was essential for manufacturing detonators. And Japan, Germany's last major ally, was running desperately short. The cargo also included 2 German engineers and 2 Japanese naval officers, men who carried in their minds knowledge of Germany's most advanced weapons research. Her destination was Kobe, Japan. Her mission was to sustain the war in the Pacific, to give Japan the tools it needed to continue fighting even as Germany fell. If she succeeded, the war might drag on for months, perhaps years longer. Commanding U-864 was Korvettenkapitan Ralph Reimar Wolfram, a 33-year-old officer with a reputation for caution and competence. He was not a glory seeker. He did not hunt for tonnage records or iron crosses. He was a navigator, a technician, a man who understood that survival depended on precision. And as he stood in the control room of his boat that February morning, he understood something else. This mission was likely a one-way journey. The voyage had already been cursed by misfortune. U-864 had originally departed in December, but engine trouble forced her back to port. Repairs took weeks. When she finally left Bergen again in early February, she was already behind schedule, and Allied intelligence had begun to suspect that something unusual was moving through Norwegian waters. In the operations room at the Royal Navy's submarine headquarters in Scotland, analysts had pieced together enough intercepted communications and reconnaissance reports to conclude that a high-value German submarine was attempting a breakout into the Atlantic. They didn't know her exact cargo, but they knew enough to prioritize her destruction. The task was given to HMS Venturer, a British V-class submarine under the command of Lieutenant James Launders, a 25-year-old officer with sharp instincts and a gift for patience. Venturer was not a large boat. She displaced only 740 tons, but she was quiet, agile, and crewed by men who had survived years of North Sea patrols. They knew the cold, the claustrophobia, the constant hum of the diesel engines, and the metallic taste of recycled air. On the morning of February 9th, Venturer was patrolling off the Norwegian island of Fedje, moving slowly at periscope depth. The sea was calm, the sky overcast. Visibility was poor, a gray shroud that made everything beyond a few hundred yards disappear into mist. Launders swept the horizon methodically, knowing that in these waters a U-boat could appear and vanish in seconds, and then, at 0912 hours, he saw it. A dark shape, low in the water. Not a merchant ship, not a trawler, a conning tower. Launders's heart did not race. He had been trained for this moment, had rehearsed it in his mind 100 times. But as he adjusted the periscope focus and watched the gray silhouette cut through the water, he realized something that made his blood run cold. The U-boat was submerged, not surfaced, not running on diesels to recharge batteries. Submerged, moving slowly beneath the surface, invisible to aircraft, invisible to radar. In the entire war, no Allied submarine had ever sunk another submarine while both were underwater. The tactic had never been attempted, never proven. It was considered nearly impossible. Underwater, sonar was unreliable. The hydrophones could pick up engine noise, but pinpointing a target's exact position, course, and speed was guesswork. Torpedoes ran straight. They didn't chase, didn't turn, didn't correct. You fired at where you thought the target would be, and if your calculations were wrong by even a few degrees or a few seconds, the torpedo would miss by hundreds of yards. And there was another problem. If Launders fired and missed, U-864 would hear the torpedo. Wolfram would know he was being hunted. He would dive deeper, change course, go silent. The advantage of surprise would be lost. And in these waters, with German coastal patrols nearby, Venturer herself could become the hunted. Launders lowered the periscope and stepped back from the eyepiece. Around him, the control room was silent. His officers watched him, waiting. The hydrophone operator sat motionless, headset pressed to his ears, listening to the faint rhythmic thrum of U-864's electric motors. "Range?" Launders asked quietly. "Approximately 3,000 yards, sir. Bearing 270. Speed estimated at 5 knots. 3,000 yards. Just over a nautical mile. Close enough to attempt a shot, but far enough that any error would be catastrophic." Launders moved to the chart table and began calculating. He knew U-864's likely course. She was heading southwest, trying to reach the open Atlantic. He knew her speed. Slow, conserving battery power, but he didn't know if she would zigzag, a standard evasive maneuver that made underwater tracking nearly impossible. For the next 45 minutes, Launders tracked the U-boat, listening, calculating, waiting. He couldn't stay at periscope depth forever. Each sweep of the scope was a risk, a chance of being spotted. But he couldn't fire blind either. And then, at 1000 hours, U-864 changed course. She turned slightly to port, a gradual shift that suggested she was beginning an evasive pattern. Launders realized he was out of time. If he didn't fire now, she would disappear into the depths, and the mission, the cargo, the engineers, the mercury, would slip away. Launders made a decision that would later be studied in naval academies around the world. He would fire a spread of 4 torpedoes, not in a straight line, but in a calculated pattern designed to intersect U-864's projected path based on her zigzag rhythm. It was not guesswork. It was mathematics married to intuition. He assumed Wolfram was following standard U-boat doctrine, a zigzag pattern with course changes every 7 to 10 minutes. If that was true, U-864 would soon turn to starboard, returning to her base course. Launders calculated where she would be in 4 minutes, then 6, then 8. He plotted intersecting points on the chart, adjusted for torpedo speed and water temperature, and marked firing solutions. "Tubes 1 through 4, he said calmly. "Prepare for sequential firing." The torpedo officer repeated the order. In the forward compartment, the crew opened the tube doors, flooded the tubes, and set the torpedoes to run at a depth of 27 feet. Shallow enough to hit a submerged submarine, deep enough to avoid surface chop. Launders raised the periscope one last time. The sea was empty. U-864 was invisible, hidden beneath the gray water. He was about to fire 4 torpedoes at a target he could not see, trusting his calculations, his experience, and the skill of his crew. Fire 1. The boat shuddered as the first torpedo left the tube, followed seconds later by the second, then the third, then the fourth. The torpedoes spread out into the water, their propellers thrumming as they accelerated to 40 knots, fanning into the calculated intercept zone. "All torpedoes running true," the hydrophone operator reported. And then silence. 60 seconds. 90. 120. The crew held their breath. No one spoke. The only sound was the faint ping of the sonar and the distant hum of Venturer's own electric motors. Inside U-864, Wolfram heard it too, the unmistakable sound of torpedo propellers, high-pitched, accelerating, growing louder. His face went white. "Dive! Full ahead! Hard to starboard!" But in a submerged submarine, there is no escape. Diving takes time. Turning takes time. And time was the one thing Wolfram didn't have. At 10-12 hours, the first torpedo passed ahead of U-864 by 50 yards, a miss, just as Launders had expected. The second passed astern, but the third, running on a slightly converging course, closed the distance. Wolfram stood frozen in the control room, listening to the sound grow louder, louder, unbearable, and then impact. The explosion tore through U-864's pressure hull amidships, directly beneath the conning tower. The force was cataclysmic. Steel plates buckled inward, bulkheads collapsed, water roared into the compartments, with the pressure of 200 feet of ocean above it. Men were thrown against machinery, lights shattered, the air filled with the smell of diesel fuel, seawater, and burning insulation. The boat tilted forward, her bow angling downward as flooding overwhelmed the forward compartments. Wolfram grabbed a handhold, shouting orders that no one could hear over the roar of water. The helmsman tried to blow the ballast tanks, but the compressed air system had ruptured. There was no way to surface, no way to stop the descent. In the forward torpedo room, the crew fought to close the watertight door, but the pressure was too great. Water forced it open, and the compartment flooded in seconds. Men drowned in darkness, trapped in a space that became a tomb. U-864 fell stern first toward the seabed, her hull groaning under the pressure, her compartments flooding one by one. At 250 feet, A second explosion, internal this time, ripped through her engine room as seawater reached the batteries, triggering a violent chemical reaction. Chlorine gas filled the remaining air pockets, choking the survivors. By 10:15 hours, U-864 had settled on the ocean floor, broken in two. 73 men were dead. The cargo, mercury, blueprints, jet components, lay scattered across the seabed, buried in silt and wreckage. Aboard Ventura, Launders listened to the breaking up noises through the hydrophones, the deep, hollow groans of collapsing metal, the hiss of escaping air, the final silence. He did not celebrate. He simply noted the time in the log, ordered a course change, and took his boat deeper to avoid any German patrol vessels that might have heard the explosion. It was not until Venturer returned to port that the full significance of the engagement became clear. Launders had achieved something unprecedented, the first, and to this day only, intentional sinking of one submarine by another while both were fully submerged. It was a feat that combined seamanship, mathematics, and courage in equal measure. But the story of U-864 did not end with her sinking. For decades, the wreck lay undisturbed, its location known only through naval records. Then, in the early 2000s, Norwegian authorities discovered that the mercury, 67 tons of it, was slowly leaking from the corroded steel flasks, contaminating the seabed and threatening local fishing waters. The wreck had become an environmental hazard, a toxic legacy of a war that had ended more than half a century earlier. Engineers proposed raising the wreck, but the operation proved too dangerous. Instead, the Norwegian government decided to entomb U-864 beneath a massive sand and rock barrier, sealing the mercury in place. The work took years. Today, the site is monitored continuously, a reminder that even in death, the weapons of war do not rest. History often remembers the great battles, the landings, the sieges, the turning points that shifted the course of nations. But beneath the surface, in the cold and dark waters of the North Sea, another kind of courage was tested. It was not the courage of charging into fire or holding a line against impossible odds. It was the courage of calculation, of patience, of making a decision in silence and living with its consequences. James Launders did not receive the Victoria Cross, though many believed he deserved it. He was awarded the Distinguished Service Order and returned to civilian life after the war, living quietly until his death in 1995. He rarely spoke of the engagement, and when he did, it was without pride or regret, only the matter-of-fact tone of a man who had done his duty. Ralph Reimar Wolfram and his crew were never recovered. Their names are inscribed on memorials in Germany, listed among the 30,000 U-boat men who never came home. They were not villains. They were sailors, following orders, trying to survive in a war that had already been lost. And somewhere beneath the North Sea, entombed in sand and stone, U-864 still rests, a steel grave holding secrets, mercury, and the memory of men who vanished beneath the Atlantic. War does not grant mercy to the brave or the careful. It takes them both, without distinction, and it leaves behind only questions, wreckage, and the stories we choose to remember.